So in our next lesson, what we're going to talk about today is adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing rules for sig figs. So whenever you add, subtract, multiply, and divide, you need to make sure that you round to the proper number of sig figs when you are done. And this is again something I talked about at the beginning of the last lesson. You need to communicate the level of uncertainty as you continue through your calculations. And for the most part, as a general rule, do not round until the end. So look at all your original numbers that you're using and then apply the sig fig rules at the end. We'll get to that in more practice when we actually deal with problems in class. So here are the basics for the rules. We'll start with multiplication and division because this is actually the easiest. And the rule says this: the number of sig figs in the result equals the number in the least precise measurement used in the calculation. So what the heck does this mean when you talk about the least precise measurement? So the interpretation of this basically means that you go with the least number of sig figs. Least number of sig figs. And you round to that. Round to the least number of sig figs. So when you look at the numbers you're multiplying, so here we have an example, 6.38. This of course has 3 sig figs. 2.0 has 2 sig figs, and of course I already have that in there. The idea is after you multiply that, you're going to get 12.76 on the calculator. If you write 12.76, you are miscommunicating the level of accuracy of your numbers and the level of uncertainty. So what you have to do is round to the least number of sig figs. 2.0 has the least number of sig figs, so that means you cut off the 12 right here because 1 and 2 are the first 2 sig figs. The 7 causes the 2 to round up and you get 13. And that would be the answer you would report after you do your multiplication and division. So again, it's pretty simple. Round to the least number of sig figs when you talk about multiplication and division. So when looking at this one, here's what I want you to do. I want you to pause this right now and plug these numbers all in your calculator and figure out what the calculator says versus what the answer says. So I'm going to give you an example with the very first one. So the very first example, when you plug in 3.24 meters times 7.0 meters, you're going to get 22.68 meters squared. So of course, meter times a meter is a meter squared. 22.68 is what you get on the calculator. This has 3 sig figs. This one has 2 sig figs. And because of that, I have to round to 2 sig figs, which means my answer will be 23 meters squared. And of course, all of this is going to be animated in a second. So pause and do the rest of the 5 on your own. Okay, so analyzing the next one, you can see that the first one has 4 sig figs. The second one has 3 sig figs. And when you divide them, you're going to get a number with lots of sig figs. And again, this is not what we want to report. When you divide grams and centimeter cube, you get grams per centimeter cube as the units, and you get this as your calculator. And so how do I round this to 3? I count 1, 2, 3. My first 3 I cut off right here, and the 9 causes the 1 to round up, giving me 4.22 grams per centimeter cube. In the next one, I only have 1 sig fig, and this one has 4 sig figs. When I multiply these two, I get 0.047242 centimeter squared, because centimeter times centimeter is centimeter squared. Again, I only want 1 sig fig, so I cut off right here. The 7 makes that round up, and I get 0.05 centimeters squared. In the next one, when I plug that in the calculator, I get again a number with lots of sig figs. This one has 2, this one has 2, that 0 at the end doesn't count. I get meters per second, so I only want 2 sig figs. So when I cut that off, I don't just write 24, I need to write 240 because this number is 236 is closest to 240 when I round up. So I put 240 meters per second. In the next one, plugging that one into the calculator, you get 5,872.786. And when you plug that in, I get pound foot, and that's basically a pressure. Actually, that's not pressure. That's actually, I don't know what that is. And so when you plug that in, when you round this one, I've got 5 in one of them, and I've got 3 in another. So that means I got to cut off right here. So that 2 doesn't round up. You get 5,870 pound-feet. And then last but not least, when you plug that into the calculator, you get 0.358850. This has 4 sig figs. This has 3. That means I cut off right here. That 8 makes that into a 9, so 0.359 grams per milliliter. So that's the rules for multiplication. If you have any questions, again, come see me. The next one we will do is the rules for addition and subtraction.